To understand a crime scene is to know exactly how to dismantle one. A seasoned investigator knows the lifespan of a fingerprint, the trajectory of blood spatter, and the damning permanence of bone. But when the architect of a murder is the very person trained to solve them, the rules inevitably warp. In the suffocating heat of Pensacola, Florida, a desperate need for $34,000 drove a former forensics expert to point a gun at her closest friend, and then bury the evidence beneath a mountain of wet concrete. She believed her intimate knowledge of the law would be the perfect shield until the concrete began to dry. Please support the channel by subscribing and liking this video. Thank you so much. Pensacola, Florida, operates as a rigid hub for military personnel and law enforcement agencies. It is a strictly functional environment defined by its concrete infrastructure and dense urban grid. In the fall of 2017, 33-year-old Taylor Wright navigated this landscape with the precise calculation of a seasoned operative. She had spent her early career wearing a badge as a sworn police officer in North Carolina before transitioning into the private sector as a licensed investigator. Her daily existence demanded constant vigilance, a tactical mindset that permeated every aspect of her life. Standing 5 feet 5 inches and weighing 130 pounds, Taylor carried herself with a defensive posture. Her routine consisted of sitting in unmarked vehicles, executing covert surveillance, and serving hostile legal summons. She understood the ugly mechanics of human deception. Colleagues described her as a fiercely independent operator who meticulously documented her surroundings and categorically refused to place blind trust in anyone. However, even the most paranoid investigators possess a psychological blind spot. For Taylor, that singular vulnerability was Ashley McArthur. Ashley was thoroughly embedded in the local criminal justice apparatus. As a former crime scene investigator for the county sheriff's office, she had spent years processing the aftermath of violent felonies. Her duties involved photographing bullet trajectories, securing physical evidence, and cataloging the precise mistakes that invariably sent criminals to prison. She knew exactly how the local homicide detectives structured their cases because she had trained alongside them. These two women shared a highly specific professional vocabulary. They understood the slow machinery of the legal system, forging a bond built on shared cynicism. After leaving the forensics unit, Ashley transitioned into a private administrative capacity, managing financial logistics and operating a business out of a large property owned by her family, a sprawling tract of land situated just outside the city limits. She successfully projected the image of a stable professional who inherently understood the value of absolute discretion. Taylor functioned as the street-level operative, sharp, confrontational, and deeply untrusting. Ashley acted as the meticulous technician, organized, methodical, and aggressively calm. They spent countless afternoons dissecting the technical failures of the criminals they used to hunt. Taylor, whose career was built on suspecting everyone, found a rare intellectual equal in the former CSI. This established dynamic shifted dramatically when Taylor's personal life began to fracture under the weight of a highly contentious divorce. The legal separation from her ex-husband rapidly devolved into an aggressive battle over assets, forcing the private investigator to seek a secure repository for her finances. Taylor urgently needed a safe harbor, someone completely insulated from the legal blast radius of her marriage, who could manage sensitive capital without leaving a prominent paper trail. Ashley fit the required profile with chilling perfection. She possessed a spotless institutional record, a deep understanding of financial compliance, and an unwavering demeanor. She was the one individual Taylor calculated was smart enough to protect her, and too disciplined to ever betray her. This calculated trust formed the architecture of a fatal mistake. Taylor failed to apply her standard interrogative rigor to her closest associate. She analyzed Ashley McArthur and saw a trusted colleague. She fundamentally failed to recognize a methodical predator quietly assessing the exact limits of her vulnerability. The professional boundaries between Taylor Wright and Ashley McArthur dissolved rapidly. They initially bonded over the shared exhaustion of navigating the male-dominated law enforcement landscape of Escambia County. Their interactions shifted from brief professional exchanges regarding case files to hours spent drinking in local bars, dissecting the psychological flaws of the suspects they investigated. Taylor viewed Ashley not just as a colleague, but as a tactical asset. Someone who understood the precise legal mechanisms of the state and operated with a similar level of strict operational security. By the summer of 2017, Taylor's marriage reached a point of total collapse. The divorce proceedings were highly adversarial, characterized by aggressive legal maneuvers and bitter disputes over shared financial resources. Taylor operated under the intense paranoia that her ex-husband would attempt to freeze her assets or claim a portion of her savings through court orders. She needed to liquidate a significant portion of her net worth and hide it completely outside the banking system's immediate view. It was a classic asset protection strategy, but it required an utterly trustworthy third party. The private investigator managed to secure a cashier's check for exactly $34,000. This piece of paper represented her absolute financial independence, her essential escape fund to establish a new life with her girlfriend in North Carolina once the divorce finalized. However, holding a cashier's check of that magnitude was a massive liability. If her ex-husband's attorneys demanded an audit, a check in her name could easily be traced and seized. She required a proxy, a completely secure, living vault. She brought the problem directly to Ashley. Taylor requested that her friend hold the $34,000 in a secure safety deposit box under the McArthur name, effectively keeping it insulated from the divorce proceedings. Ashley agreed without a moment of hesitation. She assured Taylor that the funds would be placed in a physical vault, untouched and untraceable, ready for withdrawal the exact moment the legal dust settled. Taylor handed over the check, experiencing a profound sense of relief. She had utilized her trusted professional network to outmaneuver the legal system. That single transaction marked the beginning of a massive, systematic deception. Ashley McArthur never rented a safety deposit box. She never placed the check inside a secure physical vault. On August 16, 2017, the former crime scene investigator walked into a local bank branch and deposited the entire $34,000 directly into her own personal checking account. The psychological profile of Ashley during this period is a study in absolute, chilling detachment. While Taylor was actively fighting a contentious legal battle, operating under the assumption her life savings were secure, Ashley began systematically draining the account. The bank records would later reveal a rapid, undeniable pattern of consumption. Ashley utilized Taylor's escape fund to finance a comfortable lifestyle, purchasing expensive meals, covering personal bills, buying a boat, and funding drinking sessions at the very bars where she sat right next to Taylor. Every single time the two women met, Ashley looked directly at the private investigator, fully aware she was actively burning through the woman's only financial safety net. This was not an impulsive, one-time theft. It was a sustained, daily choice to defraud a desperate friend. Ashley understood the exact consequences of her actions. As a former forensics expert, she knew intimately that financial records are permanent, leaving a digital footprint that is impossible to erase. Yet her sheer hubris convinced her she could manipulate the timeline, somehow replenish the stolen funds, or indefinitely delay Taylor's inevitable request to access the money. By early September, the pressure began to mount rapidly. Taylor's legal situation was stabilizing, and she started making concrete plans to finalize her relocation. She needed her capital immediately. The private investigator initiated contact with Ashley, asking to retrieve a portion of the funds to cover upcoming housing and relocation expenses. Ashley's response strategy relied entirely on calculated delays. She informed Taylor that accessing the safety deposit box required specific banking appointments and that the bank's operational hours conflicted with her demanding business schedule. When Taylor pressed harder, Ashley fabricated elaborate, detailed stories regarding lost keys, uncooperative bank managers, and bureaucratic errors. She maintained a flawless facade of helpfulness, consistently assuring her friend that the money was perfectly safe and that she just needed a few more days to sort out the logistics. But Taylor Wright was not an ordinary civilian. She was a licensed private investigator whose entire career was built on detecting inconsistencies in human behavior. The excuses quickly stopped making sense. The delays triggered Taylor's inherent, deeply ingrained paranoia. The professional instincts that she had previously suspended for her friend suddenly reactivated with full force. Taylor began demanding the money with increasing aggression, sending a barrage of text messages that shifted from polite requests to hard, uncompromising ultimatums. She informed Ashley that she was done waiting and expected the cash in hand. The financial trap Ashley had built for herself was now closing shut. The bank account was practically empty. The $34,000 no longer existed. There was no safety deposit box to open. Ashley realized that Taylor was days, if not hours, away from demanding to visit the bank in person to oversee the withdrawal. Once Taylor discovered the theft, she would not hesitate to involve local law enforcement. The former CSI was staring down the barrel of a major felony grand theft charge. A conviction would guarantee the complete destruction of her professional reputation, the loss of her business, and result in years of incarceration in a state penitentiary. Ashley McArthur weighed the consequences of a grand theft conviction against the alternative. She determined that returning the money was mathematically impossible, and allowing Taylor to discover the truth was simply unacceptable. The former investigator began calculating a permanent, violent solution to her financial problem. September 8, 2017, commenced with a rigid, uncompromising ultimatum. Taylor Wright woke up operating on pure tactical focus. She had entirely exhausted her tolerance for bureaucratic delays, banking errors, and shifting timelines. She communicated a final directive to Ashley McArthur, making it completely clear that the waiting period was over. Taylor required physical access to her $34,000 immediately to finalize her out-of-state relocation. She established a strict schedule for the day, confirming that she would arrive to collect her capital and would not accept any further logistical excuses. Taylor was functioning as a seasoned investigator, executing an asset recovery, cold, direct, and unyielding. Ashley received the transmission. The financial reality was absolute. Her personal accounts were depleted. The stolen funds were completely liquidated, converted into a boat, expensive bar tabs, and daily lifestyle maintenance. The former crime scene investigator recognized that her structural deception had reached its terminal point. Within a matter of hours, Taylor would realize the safety deposit box did not exist. Ashley rapidly evaluated her options. Reimbursing the money was mathematically impossible. Confessing to the theft guaranteed a felony conviction and immediate incarceration. She discarded both options and initiated a permanent violent protocol. Instead of preparing a bank draft, she secured a firearm. The weapon was not a prop. It was a lethal tool she was fully trained to deploy. Ashley proposed a minor alteration to the day's itinerary. She instructed Taylor to meet her, suggesting they first run a brief errand at a large tract of land owned by the McArthur family before heading to the bank branch. The property was a sprawling agricultural site situated far beyond the dense, monitored urban grid of Pensacola. Taylor, maintaining her focus entirely on the impending financial transfer, agreed to the geographical detour. She climbed into the passenger seat of the vehicle, sitting mere inches from the woman who had methodically drained her life savings. The transit to the rural property progressed without any recorded distress. Taylor operated under the false assumption that the tension between them was purely administrative. She remained completely blind to the lethal threat vector actively driving the car. Ashley maintained strict physiological control. Her extensive background in law enforcement operations allowed her to suppress adrenaline spikes during high-risk scenarios. She calculated the spatial isolation of the farm, the lack of surveillance infrastructure, and the auditory masking provided by the expansive rural perimeter. They arrived at the family compound in the early afternoon. The site was completely devoid of contractors, family members, or witnesses. It consisted of several acres of undeveloped dirt, scattered metal outbuildings, and heavy machinery. Ashley parked the vehicle near a cluster of storage sheds. The ground beneath their boots was heavily compacted and uneven. Both women exited the vehicle. Taylor expected a rapid task completion. She monitored her phone, calculating the remaining time before the local financial institutions closed their doors for the weekend. Ashley positioned herself with calculated precision. She required Taylor to turn away. As a former forensics technician, Ashley understood the catastrophic consequences of a frontal assault. Face-to-face violence generates defensive wounds, erratic struggle marks, and chaotic biological spatter patterns that are nearly impossible to sanitize completely. A strike executed from the rear is clinically efficient. It nullifies the victim's ability to engage in combat and restricts the physical evidence to a highly concentrated, predictable zone. Taylor turned her back. She faced the distant tree line. Ashley raised the firearm. She aimed directly at the back of her friend's skull. She pulled the trigger. The detonation was singular and absolute. The projectile severed the brainstem. Complete neurological collapse occurred in a fraction of a second. Taylor dropped straight down. There was no physical struggle. There were no defensive maneuvers. The 130-pound body hit the compacted dirt with a heavy, unceremonious thud. The sharp, acrid smell of burnt gunpowder instantly permeated the immediate perimeter. The ringing in the air faded. The former crime scene investigator stood in total silence over the private operative. The financial debt was permanently erased. However, a lethal gunshot constitutes only the initial phase of a homicide. The subsequent concealment defines the success of the operation. Ashley transitioned instantly from an active shooter back into a forensic technician. She knew intimately that simply burying human remains in loose soil is a critical operational failure. Cadaver dogs are specifically trained to detect decomposition gases venting through standard dirt. Ground-penetrating radar easily identifies anomalies in loose burial sites. She required an impenetrable synthetic barrier. Ashley gripped Taylor's remains. She dragged the dead weight across the abrasive surface of the farm toward a pre-selected depression near the property boundary. The physical friction was immense, leaving temporary drag indicators in the dust. She positioned the body inside a shallow trench. She then secured the perimeter and drove her vehicle directly to a commercial hardware store. Interior security cameras captured her navigating the aisles with a heavy-duty flatbed cart. Her demeanor was entirely methodical. She loaded the cart with multiple heavy bags of quick-setting concrete and bags of densely fertilized potting soil. She processed the transaction at the register, handling the payment with steady hands. The acquisition was executed with the calm efficiency of a contractor purchasing standard building supplies. She drove the heavy materials back to the isolated farm. Ashley manually hauled the heavy paper sacks of concrete to the edge of the trench. She ripped them open, the fine gray silica dust coating her forearms and clothing. She poured the dry chemical mix directly over Taylor's body, ensuring maximum coverage. She introduced water to the powder, immediately activating the exothermic chemical hardening process. The wet concrete emitted a strong, distinct alkaline odor as it began to cure. It rapidly formed a dense, rigid shell over the victim. She was actively constructing a subterranean sarcophagus designed specifically to trap the biological scent of decomposition and deflect the electronic signals of police scanning equipment. Once the thick concrete layer was successfully poured and began to set, Ashley utilized the heavy bags of potting soil. She dumped the dark, nutrient-rich dirt directly over the curing concrete slab, tamping it down to level the surface. She then systematically scattered old debris, broken branches, and discarded farm equipment over the newly disturbed earth. She artificially weathered the site, engineering it to blend flawlessly with the surrounding agricultural waste. To an untrained visual inspection, the burial plot appeared as nothing more than a forgotten pile of rural junk. Ashley cleaned the residual dust from her skin, packed her vehicle, and drove away from the property. She had successfully engineered what her training told her was an absolutely undetectable crime scene. The immediate aftermath of September 8th involved a total communications blackout. Taylor maintained a strict, non-negotiable daily check-in protocol with her girlfriend, residing in North Carolina. The private investigator's phone ceased transmitting data late in the afternoon. Messages accumulated without delivery confirmations. Calls routed directly to an automated voicemail system. For a professional operative who relied heavily on digital connectivity and understood the inherent risks of her daily work, this abrupt silence was an immediate indicator of a critical failure. The girlfriend did not wait for a standard 48-hour window. She waited precisely 24 hours before contacting the local authorities to formally register a missing person report, communicating an extreme level of urgency to the dispatch center. The transmission of this report through the Escambia County dispatch system generated an immediate, highly irregular social echo. The local law enforcement community operates as a closed, insulated network. Taylor was a recognized entity within this grid. She possessed a verified background as a sworn officer and actively operated as a licensed investigator within their jurisdiction. When an ordinary civilian disappears, the initial institutional assumption often leans toward a voluntary absence or a temporary crisis. When an investigator vanishes, the consensus immediately defaults to foul play. Rumors began circulating rapidly through the precinct corridors, briefing rooms, and local establishments frequented by off-duty personnel. The prevailing theory suggested that Taylor had intercepted the wrong surveillance target or triggered a violent retaliation connected to an ongoing hostile investigation. The atmosphere in Pensacola shifted from routine daily operations to a state of heightened alert. Detectives who previously interacted with the missing woman treated the case not as a standard administrative file, but as a direct attack on one of their own adjacent professionals. The internal pressure to generate immediate results was immense. Standard operating procedure dictates establishing the victim's final known physical coordinates. The investigative vector pointed directly to Ashley McArthur. She was the final individual recorded in Taylor's physical proximity before the communications blackout. Detectives initiated contact, expecting routine cooperation from a former colleague. They encountered a masterclass in calculated deflection. Ashley did not exhibit the erratic physiological markers typical of a civilian under police scrutiny. Her heart rate remained stable. Her vocal cadence was entirely flat, measured, and stripped of unnecessary emotion. She leveraged her extensive background as a crime scene technician to execute what she believed was an impenetrable alibi. She understood exactly how detectives structured interrogations, anticipating their specific lines of inquiry. She preemptively supplied the exact data points they required to close the loop on her involvement, ensuring her statements contained zero verifiable contradictions. During the formal interview process, the former forensics expert laid out a meticulously fabricated timeline. She informed the investigating officers that she and Taylor had indeed spent the morning together, attempting to resolve a complex financial transfer. She claimed they visited the bank branch, but a bureaucratic error prevented the immediate withdrawal of the requested funds. According to her narrative, this administrative failure caused her friend extreme distress. Ashley utilized indirect speech with surgical precision to shape the detective's perception of the victim's mental state. She reported that Taylor became highly agitated, verbally frustrated with the ongoing divorce proceedings, and desperate for a rapid chemical release. The core of the alibi rested on a phantom vehicle. Ashley stated with absolute conviction that after returning to the McArthur residence, Taylor abruptly summoned a commercial rideshare service. She provided a specific, logical detail, noting that her friend intended to visit a local bar to consume alcohol and decompress from the mounting legal pressure. The brilliance of this fabricated narrative lay in its operational plausibility. It successfully exploited the known stress factors in Taylor's life without over-explaining the scenario. The contentious divorce was a documented, highly volatile reality. The urgent need for a financial transfer was an established fact. A sudden desire to isolate and consume alcohol fit the behavioral profile of an individual operating under extreme psychological strain. Ashley gave the police exactly what they expected to hear. She fortified this lie by actively playing the role of the concerned, highly cooperative colleague. She voluntarily surrendered her mobile device for forensic extraction, knowing the immediate digital trail supported her bank visit narrative. She provided the detectives with physical access to her primary residence, fully aware the actual crime scene was located miles away on a separate agricultural property. She even engaged in the preliminary search efforts, maintaining constant communication with the investigative team. Every action was a calculated maneuver designed to position herself as a vital asset to the police, rather than a potential suspect. She spoke their specific institutional language, utilized correct penal code terminology, and presented a facade of absolute transparency. She knew that police officers naturally form an implicit bias toward individuals who share their professional background. The investigators initially absorbed the narrative without significant friction. The story aligned seamlessly with the available surface-level data. The local law enforcement apparatus temporarily redirected its focus outward, deploying resources to search for a non-existent rideshare driver and canvassing local bars for a woman who was already permanently encased in a concrete vault. Ashley operated under the absolute assumption that her institutional knowledge had successfully manipulated the trajectory of the entire investigation. She firmly believed she had outsmarted the system she helped build. The initial trajectory of the investigation followed the path of least resistance, focusing entirely on the victim's fractured personal life. Detectives zeroed in on the ex-husband residing in North Carolina. The logic was institutionally sound and followed standard investigative protocols. The divorce proceedings were highly adversarial, marked by bitter disputes over financial assets, property divisions, and future logistics. The ex-husband possessed a clear, documented motive. Escambia County investigators expended crucial early resources coordinating with out-of-state law enforcement agencies. They initiated a comprehensive background check, reviewing his personal financial records, pulling highway toll camera footage, and verifying his physical location during the critical window of September 8th. The internal pressure to close the case quickly pushed the entire department to focus almost exclusively on this specific angle. This pursuit proved to be a massive operational dead end. The ex-husband provided an airtight alibi backed by independent verification, witness statements, and undeniable electronic timestamps. He was hundreds of miles away when the communication blackout occurred. The investigative team realized they had burned valuable days chasing a psychological profile rather than following the physical evidence. The realization caused significant operational frustration within the precinct. The focus had to pivot immediately backward, returning directly to the last verified person to see the private operative alive. They had to stop looking at the suspect they wanted and start analyzing the suspect they actually had. The primary shift in the case occurred when the administrative wheels of the financial system finally turned. Securing bank records requires formal subpoenas, a process that inherently delays data acquisition. When the documents detailing the victim's banking history finally returned to the investigators' desks, they expected to find a hidden safety deposit box or offshore transfers related to the divorce strategy. Instead, the printed ledgers revealed a glaring, immediate anomaly that completely shattered the established narrative. The $34,000 cashier's check had never been secured in a vault. The documents showed a direct deposit initiated on August 16th, straight into a personal checking account controlled exclusively by the former crime scene technician. The financial audit laid out a clinical, undeniable timeline of theft. Investigators systematically tracked the subsequent withdrawals over the following weeks. They noted heavy, continuous expenditures that directly funded a highly comfortable lifestyle. The stolen funds were used to purchase a boat, cover daily administrative bills, and pay for expensive bar tabs, often at the exact locations where the two women socialized together. The motive was no longer theoretical or based on precinct rumors. It was documented in black and white on the banking statements. The former forensic investigator had not lost the money. She had not delayed a transfer due to banking errors. She had stolen the entire sum, systematically liquidated it, and lied directly to the police during her initial interview. Armed with this hard financial motive, the Digital Forensics Unit executed a secondary strike against the fabricated alibi. They submitted emergency requests for the historical cell tower data for both mobile devices. The resulting geographic map completely dismantled the rideshare narrative step by step. The electronic pings demonstrated that the missing woman never traveled toward any local bars or urban centers on the afternoon of her disappearance. Instead, the raw data proved that both devices traveled in perfect tandem. The signals pinged off towers moving steadily away from the dense city grid, tracking directly out of the municipal limits and terminating at a specific rural sector. The exact coordinates of the family-owned agricultural property. The digital footprint proved that the victim never left the farm alive. The investigative net closed with absolute precision. Financial investigators reviewed credit card transactions linked to the suspect on the exact day of the disappearance. They isolated a specific purchase made at a commercial hardware supplier mere hours after the victim's phone permanently ceased transmitting. Detectives secured the store's surveillance footage and the itemized receipt. The video displayed the former colleague calmly pushing a heavy-duty flatbed cart through the aisles. The receipt detailed the purchase of multiple heavy bags of quick-setting concrete and heavily fertilized potting soil. The correlation between a missing person, a stolen life savings, and the sudden acquisition of industrial burial materials triggered an immediate mobilization of the county's major crimes unit. The tactical approach shifted from a missing persons inquiry to a full-scale homicide recovery operation. A judge reviewed the accumulated electronic and financial data and signed a comprehensive search warrant for the rural property. The site was vast, cluttered with discarded metal, old machinery, and acres of hard-packed dirt. Securing the perimeter required a massive deployment of personnel. Standard search protocols were deemed insufficient for a suspect with advanced forensic training. Investigators deployed specialized cadaver dogs, specifically trained to detect human decomposition gases venting through standard soil. However, the animals exhibited erratic, confused behavior. They showed minor interest in specific sectors, but failed to provide a hard, definitive alert. The chemical barrier designed by the former technician was actively suppressing the biological indicators, proving that her forensic countermeasures were initially effective. Refusing to halt the operation, the search team transitioned to manual physical probing. Technicians formed a strict grid line and systematically drove solid metal rods deep into the earth, mapping the density of the soil across the perimeter. They focused on areas with disturbed dirt or unusual debris patterns. Behind a cluster of storage sheds, in an area artificially covered with old branches, scrap metal, and discarded agricultural equipment, a steel probe sank through a layer of soft dirt and struck a massive, impenetrable subsurface anomaly. It was a completely solid, flat structure that was entirely unnatural for the surrounding geology. Excavation crews moved in to secure the exact location. They cleared the surface debris by hand, removing the rusted metal and broken wood. Using shovels, they scraped away a thick, dark layer of potting soil that had been used to artificially level the ground. Beneath the nutrient-rich dirt, their tools hit a rigid, gray slab. It was a completely solid cap of cured concrete poured directly into a shallow, rectangular trench. The dimensions were unmistakable. The extraction required heavy mechanical tools and extreme operational caution. Crime scene technicians, operating in the exact forensic capacity their prime suspect once held, utilized jackhammers and heavy pry bars to fracture the synthetic shell. The physical labor was intense, the sharp cracks of breaking concrete echoing across the empty farm. The team had to strike the concrete with enough force to shatter it, while ensuring they did not compromise the evidentiary integrity of the remains locked beneath it. As the thick slab finally gave way and was pulled apart in heavy chunks, the suppressed biological evidence was immediately released. The remains were trapped perfectly within the hardened cast. The seasoned crime scene investigator had attempted to build an undetectable grave, but her perfect alibi was completely destroyed by the undeniable physical reality of the concrete sarcophagus. The concrete shell broke apart and the legal mechanism activated immediately. The former investigator was taken into custody. The judicial timeline moved with aggressive speed. Formal arraignment occurred within days of the arrest, firmly rejecting any opportunity for the defense to stall proceedings. The state possessed the financial ledgers, the cell tower coordinates, and the physical remains. During the trial, the courtroom dynamic was stripped of all professional courtesy. The defendant faced the exact forensic technicians she once worked alongside. Her defense attempted to shift focus back to the victim's volatile divorce, but the prosecution dismantled the theory using the defendant's own digital footprint. The hardware store receipts and bank deposits were presented as undeniable proof of a financially motivated assassination. The hubris of an expert, believing she could engineer a flawless crime, was systematically exposed by her peers. The jury required less than 90 minutes to evaluate the physical evidence. They returned a swift, unanimous verdict. The former technician was found guilty of first-degree premeditated murder. The presiding judge delivered a mandatory sentence of life in a state penitentiary, permanently locking her away from the justice system she once manipulated. The investigation into Ashley McArthur proves a rigid truth about modern homicide. Forensic knowledge provides a tactical advantage, but it cannot permanently erase a digital financial footprint. The former technician understood the exact biological processes of decomposition and the shielding properties of heavy building materials. She systematically applied this training to execute a calculated assassination. However, the exact investigative procedures she once utilized to secure convictions ultimately secured her own. The concrete sarcophagus was designed to be an absolute void. Instead, it became the undeniable physical anchor that dragged her directly into a life sentence. Please like this video and share your thoughts about this case in the comments. Be sure to check out our previous videos as well. See you soon.